If I told you that the biggest difference between profitable traders and losing traders isn't strategy, isn't capital, isn't even market knowledge, but simply the ability to wait, would you believe me? Most people wouldn't, because waiting sounds too simple, too boring, too passive. But here's the brutal truth. Your inability to wait is costing you more money than every bad trade, every wrong analysis, every mistimed entry combined. Today, I'm going to show you why your brain is literally wired to destroy your trading account through impatience, and why every successful trader you've ever heard of had to rewire that part of their brain before they became profitable. Welcome back to the channel. In this video, you'll learn why your brain treats waiting as physical pain, how dopamine addiction makes you enter trades too early, why boredom forces you to create setups that don't exist, and the exact neuroscience behind why you can't sit on your hands even when you know you should. By the end of this video, you'll understand. Impatience isn't a personality flaw. It's a biological survival mechanism that's completely incompatible with profitable trading. Let's start with something most traders experience but never talk about. You're watching the charts. You've done your analysis. You know what you're waiting for. A specific price level, a specific pattern completion, a specific confirmation, and you're sitting there, waiting. 5 minutes pass, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and something starts happening inside you. An uncomfortable feeling, a restlessness, an urge. Your mind starts rationalizing. Price is close enough. This is basically the setup. If I wait longer, I'll miss it. And before you know it, you're in the trade. Not at your level, not with your confirmation, but early, too early. And what happens? Price reverses, stops you out. Then, and only then, it goes to your original level and moves in the direction you predicted, without you. This happens to every trader, every single one. And it's not because you're undisciplined. It's because your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Avoid the pain of waiting. Let's talk about what's actually happening in your brain when you're staring at charts, waiting for your setup. There's a chemical process happening that you need to understand if you ever want to overcome impatience. It's called the dopamine anticipation cycle, and it's the reason you keep entering trades too early over and over again. Here's how it works. Dopamine isn't actually the pleasure chemical. It's the anticipation chemical. Your brain releases dopamine not when you get the reward, but when you anticipate getting it. When you see a potential setup forming, your brain starts pumping dopamine. The closer price gets to your entry, the more dopamine floods your system. And here's the critical part. That rising dopamine creates an unbearable urge to act, to get the reward now, not later. Now. This is the same mechanism that makes people refresh their email compulsively, check their phones every 2 minutes, or eat dessert before dinner. The anticipation becomes so intense that waiting for the actual reward feels impossible. In trading, this manifests as early entries. You're watching price approach your level, dopamine is rising, the anticipation is building, and your brain is screaming, "Click the button, enter now, get the reward." So you do. You enter 5 pips early or 10 pips early, and the moment you click that button, your dopamine spikes. You feel relief. You feel satisfaction. You feel like you did something. But here's the cruel twist. The market doesn't care about your dopamine. It only cares about price action. And because you entered early, you entered at a suboptimal level. Your stop is wider than it should be. Your risk to reward is worse than it should be. Your probability of success is lower than it should be, all because you couldn't handle the dopamine-driven urge to act. Let me give you a real example. Trader named Sophia. She was waiting for a pullback entry on GBPUSD. She'd identified a beautiful demand zone. Price was in a strong uptrend. She wanted to buy when price tapped into the zone and showed rejection. Perfect setup, high probability. She set her alert at 1.2650. Price was at 1.2720. She'd wait. But as price started dropping toward her level, something happened. At 1.2680, she started getting nervous. What if it doesn't pull back all the way? At 1.2670, the urge was stronger. It's close enough. At 1.2665, she entered, 5 pips above her level. And guess what happened? Price dropped to 1.2650, exactly where she wanted to enter, tapped the zone, wicked below it, hunted stops, and then reversed, hard to the upside. She got stopped out at 1.2655 for a small loss, and then watched the trade run 80 pips without her. Here's a scenario that happens every single day. You're watching a pair. Let's say EUR-USD. It's consolidating, tight range, no clear setup. So you wait. Good, that's what you're supposed to do. But then something happens. Price breaks out, hard, big green candle, volume spike, momentum, and suddenly everyone in your Discord is talking about it. EUR-USD ripping. Just entered long. This is going to the moon. And you feel it. That sinking feeling in your stomach. That voice in your head. You're missing it. Everyone else is in. You're going to be left behind. This is FOMO, fear of missing out. And it's the flip side of impatience. You waited too long, or so your brain tells you, and now you're watching the opportunity slip away. So what do? You chase it. You enter after the breakout, after the big candle, after everyone else is already in. And what happens next? Price stalls, pulls back, stops you out, then continues without you. Or worse, it reverses completely. Why? Because you entered at the worst possible time, at the moment of maximum emotional intensity and minimum edge. Let me explain what's really happening here. There are 2 types of impatience in trading. Type 1, entering before your setup is ready. Type 2, entering after your setup has already played out. Both are driven by the same core problem. Your inability to accept that sometimes the right move is to do nothing. When you miss a trade because you were patient and waiting for your level, your brain doesn't reward you. It punishes you. You see the move happen without you. You see other traders posting profits. You see the opportunity that could have been yours. And your brain interprets this as a loss. Even though you didn't lose money, it feels like you did. This psychological pain is so intense that your brain creates a new rule. Next time, don't wait. Just get in. And that's how FOMO is born. You start entering trades not because they meet your criteria, but because you're afraid of experiencing that feeling of missing out again. Let me tell you about a trader named Marcus. This guy had decent technical skills, could read charts, knew his patterns, but he had a fatal weakness. He couldn't stand watching moves happen without him. I watched him for a month. Same pattern every week. Monday and Tuesday he'd be patient. He'd wait for setups. He'd follow his plan. Then Wednesday or Thursday he'd miss one good move, just one. Maybe he was away from his desk. Maybe he hesitated. Doesn't matter. The result was the same. He'd see the move play out. 50 pips, 70 pips, and he'd torture himself over it. I saw that setup. I should have taken it. And from that point on, for the rest of the week, he'd chase everything, every breakout, every spike, every hint of momentum. He'd enter late, get stopped out, and bleed his account. One day I asked him, "Why do you do this? You know you're chasing." He said, "I can't help it. I feel like I'm wasting time if I'm not in a trade." There it is again, the core issue. Your brain equates activity with progress. Sitting in cash feels like you're not trading. Watching a move without being in it feels like failure. But here's the truth. Missing a trade is not a failure. Missing a trade is part of trading. Professional traders miss trades all the time. They wait for their setup. If it doesn't come, they don't trade. If it comes and they miss it, they move on. No emotion, no FOMO, no chasing. Let's talk about the most dangerous emotion in trading. It's not fear. It's not greed. It's boredom. You've been watching charts for 2 hours. Nothing's happening. No setups. No clear direction. Just chop. Back and forth. Your strategy says, wait. Be patient. Don't force anything. But here's what your brain is doing. It's screaming at you. This is boring. This is a waste of time. You opened your charts to trade, not to stare at lines. And slowly, subtly, your standards start to drop. That choppy range? Maybe it's actually a triangle forming. That random wick? Maybe that's rejection. That barely noticeable volume increase? Maybe that's accumulation. You start seeing patterns that aren't there. Not because you're delusional, but because your brain is so desperate to do something, anything, that it begins fabricating reasons to trade. This is what I call a forced trade. A trade you take not because the setup is there, but because you can't tolerate doing nothing anymore. Let me give you the psychology behind this. Humans are wired for action. For most of human history, sitting still meant vulnerability. Doing nothing meant you weren't hunting, gathering, building, or protecting. Inactivity was dangerous. So our brains developed a mechanism to make inactivity uncomfortable. That mechanism is still active today. When you sit in front of your charts doing nothing, your brain interprets it as wasted time, as inefficiency, as a threat to your productivity. So it pushes you to act. And in trading, that push is deadly. Let me tell you about a guy named Ethan. Swing trader, had a solid strategy, only took setups at key levels with clear confirmation. On paper, he should have been profitable, but he wasn't. Why? Because he couldn't handle the days when there were no setups. I looked at his trading journal. On days when his strategy gave him a clear setup, his win rate was 68%. Excellent. But those days only happened 2 or 3 times a week. The other days? The days when the market was choppy or ranging or just not offering anything clean? He still traded. He'd force trades. He'd lower his standards. He'd convince himself that this kind of counts as my setup. And on those forced trade days, his win rate was 31%. Brutal. When I showed him this data, he was shocked. He said, "I didn't even realize I was doing that." But he was. Because boredom doesn't announce itself. It doesn't say, "Hey, I'm boredom, and I'm about to make you take a terrible trade." It disguises itself as opportunity. It whispers, "This could work. You've seen worse setups win before. Just take it." Here's what makes forced trades so dangerous. They feel justified in the moment. You're not consciously saying, "I'm bored, so I'll gamble." You're rationalizing. You're telling yourself a story about why this trade makes sense. The trend is still up, so buying here is reasonable. It's near support, close enough. Volume is picking up, kind of. These aren't lies. They're half-truths. Just enough logic to give you permission to click the button. But deep down, you know this isn't your A setup. You know you're forcing it. And the market punishes you for it every single time. Here's something that confuses a lot of traders. There's a massive difference between waiting for a setup and just watching the charts aimlessly. Most people think they're being patient when really, they're just being passive. Let me explain. A patient trader is actively waiting. They know exactly what they're looking for. They've identified their levels. They've marked their zones. They've set their alerts. They're prepared to act the instant their criteria are met. They're like a sniper, positioned, focused, ready, but not shooting until the target is in the crosshairs. A lazy observer, on the other hand, is just staring at charts with no real plan. They're waiting, but they don't know what they're waiting for. They're watching price move, but they're not analyzing. They're present, but not engaged. And when something finally happens, they're not ready. They hesitate. They second guess. They miss the entry. Then they beat themselves up for being too patient. But that's not patience. That's indecision disguised as discipline. Let me tell you about 2 traders. First guy, Daniel. He'd sit in front of his charts for 6 hours a day, every day. He'd watch every tick, every candle, every little wiggle in price. And at the end of most days, he'd taken 0 trades. He'd tell people, "I'm very patient. I wait for the perfect setup." But when I asked him, "What setup are you waiting for?" he couldn't give me a clear answer. "I'll know it when I see it," he'd say. That's not patience. That's paralysis. Compare that to a woman named Jade. She'd open her charts once in the morning, spend 20 minutes doing analysis, mark 3 key levels, set alerts. Then she'd close her platform and go live her life. When the alert hit, she'd check if her confirmation criteria were met. If yes, she'd enter immediately. If no, she'd wait for the next alert. She'd take 2 or 3 trades a week. High quality, high conviction. That's active patience. She wasn't glued to her charts. She wasn't working hard. But she was clear, prepared, and decisive. Here's the critical distinction: waiting with intention versus waiting without direction. When you wait with intention, you know your entry criteria. You know your invalidation point. You know what you're looking for and what you're avoiding. Your patience has a purpose. But when you wait without direction, you're just hoping something will feel right. And hope is not a strategy. The market doesn't reward you for hours spent staring at charts. It rewards you for precision, for clarity, for taking the right trade at the right time. I remember my mentor telling me something that changed how I approach this. If you can't write down exactly what you're waiting for before you start watching the charts, you're not being patient. You're procrastinating. That hit hard, because I realized I'd been confusing screen time with preparation. I thought sitting in front of charts for hours made me dedicated, but really, I was just watching price move with no clear plan. And when I finally took a trade, it was usually impulsive, not intentional. Let's talk numbers, because impatience isn't just a psychological problem. It's a mathematical killer. And most traders don't realize how much money they're leaving on the table, or worse, actively losing, by entering trades just a few pips too early. Here's a simple scenario. You identify a demand zone. You want to buy when price hits 1.1000 with a stop at 1.0980. That's a 20 pip stop. Your target is 1.1060. That's a 60 pip target. Your risk to reward ratio is 1-3. Solid trade. But you get impatient. Price is at 1.1015. Close enough, right? You enter. Now your stop is still at 1.0980, but your entry is at 1.1015. Your risk just increased from 20 pips to 35 pips, and your target is still 1.1060. Your reward is now 45 pips instead of 60 pips. Your risk to reward just went from 1-3 down to 1-1.3. You've destroyed your edge with one impatient click. And here's the worst part. You probably won't even notice. You'll take the trade, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but you won't go back and calculate how much that impatience cost you. Let me give you a real example. Trader named Leo. He had a strategy with a back-tested 58% win rate and an average 1 to 2.5 risk-to-reward ratio. Over 100 trades, that strategy should be very profitable, but Leo was break-even after 6 months. Why? I reviewed his trades. Out of 100 trades, 73 of them were entered early. Not massively early, just 5 to 15 pips before his actual level. On the surface, that doesn't sound like much. But here's what it did. It increased his average risk by 40% and decreased his average reward by 25%. His 1 to 2.5 RR became 1 to 1.4. His 58% win rate stayed roughly the same, but his profit factor collapsed. Instead of making money, he was treading water. All because he couldn't wait for his exact level. When I showed him this, he was stunned. He said, "I had no idea it made that much difference." But it does. Every pip matters. Every fraction of your risk to reward matters. And impatience destroys both. Here's another layer most people miss. Early entries don't just hurt your RR, they also increase your loss rate. Why? Because when you enter before your level, you're entering before the market has given you confirmation. You're hoping price will bounce. You're assuming your level will hold. But you don't know yet. And when you enter at your exact level, especially if you wait for confirmation like a wick rejection or a bullish engulfing candle, you have evidence that buyers are stepping in. Your probability of success increases. Let me give you some brutal math. Let's say you take 10 trades a month. On each trade, entering early costs you 0.3 R on average because of worse risk to reward and higher stop-outs. That's 3 R per month. Over a year, that's 36 R lost to impatience. If you're risking 1% per trade, that's 36% of your account. Gone. Not because of bad strategy, not because of bad analysis, but because you couldn't wait 30 more seconds for price to hit your level. That's the real cost of impatience. And most traders never calculate it. Let's talk about the most common symptom of impatience: overtrading. And I don't mean taking high-frequency trades as part of a scalping strategy. I mean taking trades you know you shouldn't take, simply because you can't sit still. Here's how it usually goes. You plan to take 2 setups this week. You identified them Sunday night. Clean levels, clear criteria, high probability. You're disciplined, you're focused. Monday comes. Your first setup triggers. You take it. It stops out. Small loss. No big deal. That's trading. But now something shifts inside you. You're down for the week. And your brain hates being down. It wants to get back to break even. It wants to recover. So you start scanning the charts more aggressively, looking for another setup. And here's where impatience takes over. You see something that's kind of close to your criteria. Not perfect, but close. Maybe this works, you think. You take it. It stops out. Now you're down 2 trades. The hole is deeper, and the urge to recover is stronger. By the end of the week, you've taken 11 trades. 9 of them weren't even part of your original plan. They were revenge trades, recovery trades, boredom trades, FOMO trades. And your account is bleeding. Not because your strategy doesn't work, but because you couldn't stick to the 2 trades you actually planned for. This is overtrading driven by impatience, and it's one of the fastest ways to destroy an account. Let me tell you about a trader named Chris. He had a simple rule: only trade setups at daily key levels with 4-hour confirmation. That was it. Clean, clear, no ambiguity. When he followed this rule, he won 64% of his trades. When he didn't, he won 38%. I looked at his stats over 3 months. He took 89 trades total. Only 22 of those trades met his actual criteria. The other 67? Overtrading, impatience. And those 67 trades wiped out all the profit from the 22 good ones. When I showed him this, he said, "I don't even remember taking half of these." That's how insidious overtrading is. It happens almost unconsciously. You're sitting there, charts are open, you're bored, or frustrated, or anxious. And before you know it, you're in a trade you never planned to take. Here's why impatience leads to overtrading. Your brain associates trading with action. The more you trade, the more you feel like you're working. The more you're working, the more you feel like you're making progress. But in reality, the opposite is true. The best traders take the fewest trades. They wait for absolute clarity. They pass on 90% of what they see, and they only strike when everything aligns. But your impatient brain can't accept that. It sees an empty trading day as a wasted day. Let me give you a comparison. Imagine 2 traders. Trader A takes 50 trades a month, scattered, random quality, win rate 48%, average RR 1 to 1.2, net result -4R for the month. Trader B takes 8 trades a month, high conviction, planned setups, win rate 62%, average RR 1 to 2.5, net result +7R for the month, same market, same time frame, completely different results. The only difference? Patience. Trader B wasn't smarter, wasn't more talented, just more patient. And that patience translated directly into profit. Here's the hard truth. Every trade you take beyond your plan is a trade against yourself. You're not beating the market. You're not outsmarting smart money. You're just feeding your impatience. And the market is happy to take your money while you do it. If you want to stop overtrading, you need to stop equating activity with productivity. You need to accept that sometimes the best trade is no trade. And you need to build the mental strength to sit on your hands even when every fiber of your being is screaming at you to do something. Here's a painful truth. Most traders can't handle being in profit. I know that sounds backwards. Everyone thinks the hard part is dealing with losses. But actually, the hardest part for most traders is holding a winning trade. Let me explain what happens. You take a trade. It's a good setup. Everything aligns. You enter. And immediately price starts moving in your direction. 5 pips profit, 10 pips, 20 pips. And something starts happening inside you. An overwhelming urge to close it, to lock in the profit, to make sure you don't give it back. Your brain is screaming, take it now. What if it reverses? What if you lose this profit? Close the trade. And most traders give in. They close at 20 pips when their plan was to hold for 60 pips. They take the small win. They feel good for about 30 seconds, and then they watch price continue exactly as they predicted, hitting their original target without them. They left 40 pips on the table, not because their analysis was wrong, but because they couldn't tolerate the discomfort of holding a winner. Let me tell you why this happens. Loss aversion. It's a psychological principle discovered by Daniel Kahneman. The pain of losing is roughly twice as intense as the pleasure of winning. So when you're in a winning trade, your brain doesn't see opportunity. It sees risk. You have profit now. If you hold and it reverses, you'll lose this profit. That will hurt. Close it now to avoid that potential pain. This is why traders hold losing trades too long and cut winning trades too short. In a losing trade, you're avoiding the pain of realizing the loss. In a winning trade, you're avoiding the pain of potentially giving back profit. Let me give you a story. Trader named Vanessa. Excellent analyst. Could call market direction with scary accuracy. But she couldn't make money. Why? Because she'd take a trade, be right, and then close it way too early. I watched her take a swing trade on EURUSD. Perfect entry at a demand zone. Target was 80 pips away. Stop was 25 pips. Clean 1 to 3.2 risk to reward. Price moved 15 pips in her favor within the first hour, and she started panicking. Not because the trade was going against her, but because it was working. What if it reverses, she thought. At 22 pips profit, she closed it. Minutes later, price continued. Hit her original 80 pip target. She made 22 pips when she should have made 80 pips. When I asked her why she closed early, she said, "I didn't want to be greedy." But that's not what happened. She wasn't avoiding greed. She was avoiding discomfort. The discomfort of holding a position while profit fluctuates. The discomfort of watching unrealized profit shrink during a small pullback. The discomfort of trusting her plan instead of her emotions. And that discomfort cost her 58 pips. Do that 10 times, and you've lost 580 pips to impatience. That's the difference between a profitable month and a break-even month. Here's the math that most traders ignore. Let's say you have a 50% win rate. You risk 1 R per trade. When you win, your plan says you should make 2.5 R. Over 10 trades, that's 5 wins and 5 losses. 5 losses at 1 R equals minus 5 R. 5 wins at 2.5 R equals plus 12.5 R. Net profit plus 7.5 R. Great. But what if impatience makes you close winners at 1.2 R instead of 2.5 R? 5 wins at 1.2 R equals plus 6 R. Net profit plus 1 R. You went from 7.5 R profit to 1 R profit. Not because you were wrong, but because you were impatient. And here's what makes it even worse. Closing winners early creates a psychological trap. When you close a trade early and then watch it hit your target without you, you feel regret. Intense regret. And that regret makes you more likely to hold the next trade too long, trying to make sure you don't miss the full move again. So you hold through pullbacks. You hold through signs of reversal, and you turn what should have been a winner into a break-even trade or even a loser, all because you couldn't handle the discomfort of letting a winner run the first time.